and they join you, our viewing audience, for the next 90 minutes as we discuss the key issues of this 2015 campaign. Let's welcome the three party leaders here tonight. From the Conservative Party, Stephen Harper. From the New Democratic Party, Thomas Mulcair. And from the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau. There is little doubt this election is about the economy. All parties, I think, can agree at least with that. And with the country struggling to find its economic mojo, we have some tough questions for the leaders this evening. The first half deals with 6 topics: jobs, energy and the environment, infrastructure, immigration, housing, and taxation. Each area will begin with a question from me to one of the 3 leaders, with a follow-up question to that same leader. I'll then push the question to a second leader for a quick answer before an open floor debate. None of the 3 leaders has advanced knowledge of the questions, only the broad themes. And the order of speaking and the positions on the stage were randomly drawn with party representatives. That's the housekeeping. Let's begin. The reason we are here tonight is to come to grips with this country's challenges. And the first question goes to you, Mr. Harper, and the question is on jobs. Canada is facing structural rather than cyclical change. Do you have a jobs plan for industry beyond taking things out of the ground?
Absolutely, David, but if you don't mind, let me just begin by saying, because we're in southern Alberta, I want to take a moment to give my condolences to the Blanchette and the Dunbar families on the terrible deaths of Haley and Terry. These are obviously senseless acts, and I know that everybody here across the country, our thoughts and prayers are with those families. On jobs, David, our approach is multifaceted. There's several things we're doing. Obviously, the centerpiece of our plan is to make sure we are making practical investments that are affordable, that we can do while keeping our taxes down and keeping our budget balanced. But there's a number of things we're doing, including, for instance, particular interventions in the labor market to make sure we're training people for the jobs that are available, orienting our immigration policy that way, encouraging innovation in our manufacturing sector, opening up trade markets. We've signed more trade agreements than ever before. There's a whole series of things we're doing, but the core to protecting our economy is making sure that our budgets remain balanced and our taxes remain down.
Your dream, though, of being an energy superpower have not been realized. For those who are worried about jobs of the future, what comes next?
Well, I think I just laid out exactly where we're going. We are living in a very challenged global economy. We have enormous economic instability out there. Through it all, the Canadian economy has managed to create a large number of jobs, a better record than anyone in the G7, 1.3 million net new jobs since the end of the global financial crisis, most of them full-time in the private sector, in good wage industries. Incomes have been rising. Now, there are still challenges, and we can do more, but the essence of our plan is making sure that we make investments that we can afford. The other parties are trying to tell us they will deal with the challenges of our economy, of our labor market, of international markets, by raising taxes and running deficits to finance vastly increased amounts of spending. That is not the way to protect our economy in this environment. The way to protect our economy is make specific investments that will help build our labor force, build our infrastructure, build our manufacturing and other resource industries, while at the same time making sure we're keeping our taxes down and our budget balanced.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. That's Mr. Harper's answer. To Mr. Mulcair we go. Jobs. You need to do more, surely, than support just the manufacturing sector. What is your jobs plan?
Well, I listened carefully to your question to the Prime Minister, and I was disappointed that he wasn't able to go beyond resource extraction. Mr. Harper put all of his eggs into one basket, and then he dropped the basket. 400,000 well-paid manufacturing jobs lost on his watch. There are now 300,000 more Canadians without a job than when the recession hit in 2008. So we have a plan to kickstart the economy, to grow manufacturing jobs, work on innovation. We want to drop the taxes of Canada's small and medium-sized businesses because they create 80% of new jobs in this country. And we also want to help people get ahead and make their lives easier, because making sure that you can balance your work life and your family life is important to the NDP. So that's why one of our key planks in this platform is to make sure that we bring in quality, affordable childcare across Canada at most $15 a day. Once it's fully ramped up, that'll be 1 million quality, affordable childcare spaces across the country. That'll be good for the economy, but it'll also be good for women, because it's almost always women who make tough sacrifices in their careers.
Mr. Mulcair. Mr. Trudeau, can you please lead this open part of the debate?
Now, thank you, David. It's great to be here in Calgary tonight. I want to start with a few questions, my friends. Are you better off now than you were 10 years ago when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister? Is our country better off? Do you have better job prospects? Do you have confidence that your kids have a brighter future? I've spent a long time talking with thousands of Canadians across this country. And Mr. Harper may not see what's going on from 24 Sussex Drive, but I do. I know that Canadians are worried about their jobs, and that's what this election is about. Their jobs and the jobs that their kids are going to have.
But Mr. Trudeau...
That's why we have a plan, a strong and clear plan, to invest in the middle class, to grow the economy, give it a kickstart it needs, and put more money in Canadians' pockets. That starts with actually raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we can lower them for the middle class. It starts with investing in Canada once again, in roads, in clean water, in transit, in jobs. And when we talk about that investment, we're very clear. We're going to run 3 modest deficits in order to pay for it. Now, those are the kinds of investments that Mr. Harper hasn't made for 10 years. And if you think this economy is doing great, then Mr. Harper is your guy. But if you need a change, the Liberal Party has a plan.
Well, look, I've never said things are great. What I've said is we're living in a very unstable global economic environment. The questions I would ask people at home are the following. In the last 10 years, where would you rather have been in all this global economic instability? Where would you rather have been than Canada? Looking forward, where would you rather be than Canada? I think these are the key questions. Mr. Trudeau proposes permanent deficits. He's opposed, for example, to our cuts to small business, small business taxes. And the reason Mr. Trudeau said he was opposed to small business cuts is he said a large percentage of small businesses are just wealthy people avoiding taxes. Mr. Trudeau, small business is the backbone of the middle class, and it's the backbone of the Canadian economy.
Mr. Harper,
that's why among our investments,
Mr. Harper, you know full well that the Liberal, Mr. Harper knows full well that the Liberal Party plan is to drop small business taxes from 11 to 9%. He's just playing politics. We have a plan not only to encourage small businesses, but to invest in what small businesses need, like reliable transportation, like a growing economy. Mr. Harper has not only the worst growth record on jobs, the worst job creation record since World War II, he has the worst record on economic growth since the Great Depression.
Okay.
We need to grow this economy, and he has failed.
Mulcair, you're hearing a good ding-dong between these two. Where are you?
Well, I'm going to try to ring their bell. While Mr. Harper thinks that everything is just fine the way it is, Mr. Trudeau is proposing to dump tens of billions of dollars in new debt on the backs of future generations. Prime Minister wants to hit the snooze button while Mr. Trudeau is hitting the panic button. Canadians deserve to know what they're voting on in this election. The NDP has put its numbers out there. We put out a costed plan yesterday. It's frankly reliable and it's sustainable. We've put out numbers, and neither of these will do the same. At least we should respect the voting public and let them have an informed decision in this election.
I think
Mr. Harper, you grimaced with that.
Well, look, both of these parties talk about cutting taxes for small business, doing this small business tax cut that we are already moving forward with for the next 4 years. But what they also propose, and small businesses know this around the country, they propose hikes to payroll taxes, to CPP particularly, and also employment insurance, that are 10 times bigger than the tax cuts they are promising small business. That's why the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has come out against these plans. That's why Canadian Federation of Independent Business and other experts today said that Mr. Mulcair's tax increases will cost at least 250,000 jobs. You don't protect our economy, and you don't move it forward and create jobs by running
Mr. Harper has demonstrated once again that he's missing the point. Canadians need support. The fact that he's talking about pensions as taxes, why pensions aren't taxes, Mr. Harper, Harper, is when people retire, they get their pension money back. They don't get taxes back. That's where the difference is. And Mr.
Trudeau, that's a
Mulcair
decision
needs
for
to
people
hit.
to make
Mr.
themselves.
Mulcair needs to hit the wake-up call. Mr. Mulcair has missed the opportunity to invest in Canadians the way we need to.
Let's have Mr. Harper quickly respond in a sentence, then we'll come to Mr. Mulcair.
Look, we have given all kinds of tax incentives for people to save, and they're taking advantage of them. 11 million people
they're
live
not,
in
Mr.
tax-free
Harper.
savings accounts. Workers and employers, small employers, do not want these tax hikes. And when you say they're not tax hikes, they're coming right out of the paychecks. $1,000 for the Liberal Party proposal out of someone making $60,000 a year.
That's
comes out
Harper,
of the mortgage,
you're inventing
comes out
those
of
numbers.
planning for education, comes out of putting food on the table.
Let's go to Mr. Mulcair
It's
for
not
the
just money
final
that
word on
appears
this.
out of thin air.
Mr. Mulcair.
That was a really long sentence, David. Look, the average Canadian knows that a pension plan is necessary. The Canada Pension Plan, as far as Mr. Harper is concerned, is a tax. We view it as an investment in the future. I'm tired of watching successive Liberal and Conservative governments dump these massive ecological, economic, and social debts on the backs of future generations.
Thank you very much. And that brings us, with some relief, to the end of the first question. We move now to the second topic, energy and the environment. And this question goes to Mr. Mulcair. Mr. Mulcair, in the last campaign, the NDP put a cost of $21 billion on its carbon pricing policy. What is your current proposal, and what would the cost be for carbon emissions?
Well, thank you very much, David. And we know that a dynamic and innovative energy sector is crucial for Canada for the years to come. And we also know that Canada has international obligations that it has to follow through on. The Liberals signed Kyoto with no plan. They admitted they had no plan to respect it. That's why they went on to have one of the worst records in the world for greenhouse gas production. Shamefully, Stephen Harper made Canada the only country in the world to withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol. Now, when I talk about avoiding leaving a massive debt on the backs of future generations, this is exactly what we're talking about. So yes, we've always believed that the best way to ensure a reduction in greenhouse gases is with what's called a cap-and-trade system. Actually, Canada and the United States had a very successful model of that to reduce SO2 when it was causing acid rain on our forests. It's worked before and it can work again. But above that, everybody has to understand that there are tens of thousands of jobs across the country, and especially here in Alberta, that rely on that sector. And we need to understand that we have to develop our resources responsibly and sustainably, which is exactly what I did when I was the minister.
Mr. Mulcair, I'm going to go back at that. Let's get the costing. What is the costing for your carbon emission proposal? Is it cap and trade similar to Ontario and Quebec? Is it a carbon tax like British Columbia? What would the cost be?
No, I don't think that you can guarantee a reduction with a carbon tax. A carbon tax is about the tax, although there is more and more information available. A cap-and-trade system can guarantee the reduction. These are basic principles of sustainable development. You have to make sure that you make the polluter pay for the pollution that they're creating. You can't allow people to use the air, the soil, and the water.
Would that not create revenue hemorrhaging in Alberta to tie with Ontario and Quebec?
No, that's not what happened when we brought in the cap-and-trade system to reduce the SO2 that was causing acid rain. And you could, of course, make sure that you're reinvesting in green energy technologies. Around the world, there will be $5 trillion spent on green energy technologies in the next 15 years. Unfortunately, Canada's not even going to be part of it because we have a government that has taken a rip-and-ship approach to sending our resources as fast as they can to other places. We've got to take a different approach, add jobs here in Canada.
But is the bill going to be more than $21 billion or less?
Well, of course, as you know, that was something that was proposed last time, and the cap-and-trade system that we're proposing now has no such bill, and you know that, Mr.
Thank you. Let's move now to Mr. Trudeau. For your plan, it looks like a lot of it is left to the provinces. How do you lead the country, perhaps going to the UN Climate Conference later this year, without a Canadian policy?
Well, we have a Canadian policy, and it's one that recognizes that for 10 years, under Mr. Harper, with no leadership on the environment, provinces have moved forward, and 86% of our economy, our 4 biggest provinces, have actually committed to putting a price on carbon. And they've done it in different ways, which makes Mr. Mulcair's proposal so unrealistic. The idea of imposing a bureaucracy out of Ottawa, a cap-and-trade system on provinces like British Columbia that have already moved forward with a world-renowned carbon tax that is actually working for them is actually a completely nonsensical plan. We are committed to working with the provinces to reduce emissions, to encourage them to hit those the targets needed so that we can contribute as a responsible country once again to reducing emissions. We will go to Paris for the climate change conference with all premiers to talk about how we are going to meet that responsibility we collectively share on this planet to prevent a 2-degree increase in global temperatures.
Thank you. I think we're hearing a lot of skating. Let's go to the Conservative leader. Mr. Harper, you start off the open floor portion.
Well, look, David, I would just point out this is the first government in Canadian history that has actually been able to see a reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time seeing the economy grow, and we're very proud of that. We didn't do that through carbon tax schemes, principally because carbon taxes are not about reducing emissions. Carbon taxes are about raising revenue for the government. And in one form or another, that's what the other parties are proposing. We've been moving forward with a regulatory approach, sector by sector, where we actually know the costs and effects of putting in new regulations and reducing emissions before we actually do it. So it's not just left to chance. But I do, David, want to address the other half of the debate, which is the energy sector. You know, it's been a very important driver of the Canadian economy. It's obviously having a significant downturn right now because of the fall of energy prices. And that sector needs a government that is on its side. We want to see this sector grow and develop.
The problem is, Mr. Walmsley, under Stephen Harper's stewardship, we have not built 1 kilometre of pipeline to Tidewater, and it's easy to understand why. He's gutted a whole series of environmental laws. We don't have a credible, thorough environmental assessment process left in this country. The public is not on side. He thought he was helping the energy companies by destroying that legislation. He's actually made their lives tougher. When I was the minister in Quebec, Mr. Walmsley, I lowered greenhouse gas production in our province every year for the 3 years I was the Minister of the Environment. It can be done. We brought in overarching sustainable development legislation, the toughest in North America. We went so far as to change the Charter of Rights to include the right to live in a clean environment. It can be done. Mr. Harper sees the environment and the economy as polar opposites. Everybody in Canada knows you have to work on both at the same time.
Which is why we've done both. Mr. Mulcair, you actually are the only leader in Canadian history to have gone to another country, you and your colleagues, to the United States to argue against Canadian jobs and against Canadian development projects.
It's exactly the opposite, Mr. Harper. It's exactly the opposite, Mr. Hold on, Mr. Walmsley.
Let Mr. Trudeau and let Mr. Trudeau.
He just said something to me, and I'm going to answer him. 40,000 Canadian jobs would be exported to the United States with Keystone XL. That's not our figure. That's the Government of Canada's figure under Mr. Harper's Conservatives. I want to create those 40,000 jobs in Canada. Let's add value to our natural resources here. That's the way to sustainably develop our resources.
That's why trade's a good thing.
Let's go to Mr. Trudeau.
Mr. Mulcair talks about having been Minister of the Environment in Quebec, but I was living in Quebec at that time, and I remember he was proposing bulk water exports to the United States for Quebec, and that's certainly not something we're interested in.
False,
you gave a speech on it. You said it could be like forestry in the. Well, listen. Look at your own record, Mr.
You look
Mulcair.
at the record.
The fact is, Mr. Harper continues. Mr. Harper continues to pretend that there is a choice between environment and economy. He chooses to say that you cannot build a strong economy if you're still protecting the environment, and that has been his failure. And that has been his failure felt right here in Calgary. He talks about being the best friend that Calgary has ever had, that Alberta has ever had, but he hasn't gotten pipelines built. He has made the oil sands an international pariah, and with friends like Stephen Harper, Alberta doesn't need enemies.
Let's bring it back to some costing. What is the costing of your plan? Mr. Mulcair first.
Our plan for sustainable development includes bringing in overarching legislation that will be rigorously enforced and provide action when a company is trying to pollute the environment. Mr. Harper talks a good game on international trade deals. He's done everything in his power to stop the authorities that exist under the North American Free Trade Agreement from even measuring the pollution going into the environment in Canada. That's his track record. We'll enforce overarching sustainable development legislation. We'll apply it fairly and equally to everyone. And Canadians will know that we're going to stop leaving this massive ecological debt on the backs of future generations.
Now, you asked about our costing. Not only will we move forward on pricing carbon with the provinces and ensuring that we're reducing greenhouse gases in a responsible way, the Liberal Party is also committed to investing $20 billion over 10 years in greener infrastructure. That's floodplains mitigation here in Calgary and places across the country. It's investing in clean jobs, in green tech, in making sure that we're moving towards renewable energies. Yes, we need to get our resources to market. It's one of the fundamental responsibilities of a Prime Minister. But in order to do that, we need to move in a responsible way that understands the future that we're leaving to our kids.
Mr. Harper?
Look, we're investing heavily in green energy, about $1 billion a year in green energy and energy efficiency technology. But what we're not doing is imposing costs upon consumers. We're in a fragile global economy. We don't need additional costs. You know, we heard the same old story from the NDP on this. They say, we're going to fix this somehow through raising taxes. In their platform yesterday, they put in a bunch of tax increases for the energy and mining sector.
Completely false.
You know, this is the same story we had in Alberta when the NDP came to office. We'd somehow fix our problems through raising taxes. And now what have we seen? Now I know tradespeople who are now getting higher individual tax bills. We see people getting layoffs because their employers are paying higher taxes.
Mr. Harper's solution
higher taxes
to everything
are not
has
the
been
way
to drop
you're
the
going
taxes
to move the
to
energy
tune
sector
of
or the
tens
Canadian
of
economy
billions
forward
of dollars.
to challenge global economy.
He's dropped the taxes.
Mr. Mulcair, please. Mr. Mulcair,
Mr.
the
Harper
final
has
word.
dropped the taxes of Canada's largest corporations by tens of billions of dollars. If that was such a good idea to create jobs, how come we lost 400,000 well-paid manufacturing jobs? How come we have 300,000 more unemployed today than when Mr. Harper's first recession hit in
Jobs are up,
2008?
We now move to the third topic, which is infrastructure. And this goes to Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Trudeau, you're committed to taking us into deficit in order to fund your infrastructure plan. Spending money is an easy promise. What does success look like?
Well, Canadians understand that when you want to buy a new home or renovate your existing home because you're adding to the family, you take out a bank loan. You know that you can invest in your future because that's what confident, optimistic countries do. We invest in our future. And right now, Mr. Harper thinks that the investments he's made over the past 10 years are enough. They're not, because he has the worst job creation rate since World War II. He has the worst growth rate of any Prime Minister since the Great Depression. We need to create the transit that Canadians need, and we need to start doing it right now. Mr. Mulcair talks about putting things off for 3, 5, 10, 20 years. That's not what we need. We're the only party has said, yes, we will run 3 modest deficits because it's time to invest in Canada once again and give people the support they need. That's why we're going to work with municipalities and provinces to identify the necessary projects and get them built, because we will invest in the future of our country.
Mr. Trudeau, you say that you would create a new infrastructure bank. That is dependent upon Canada's pension funds investing. So far, they haven't chosen to do that because the projects in Canada are too small. What if they don't sign up?
Actually, that's not at all true, David. We are actually proposing a new infrastructure bank that will help provinces and municipalities borrow at the advantageous rate that the federal government actually has. Yes, we are, as a separate initiative, looking to encourage pension funds to invest here in Canada, but in order to do that, we have to have a much more robust partner in the federal government. For a decade now, Mr. Harper has underinvested in our infrastructure, and while he's been running fiscal deficits, has also been increasing our infrastructure deficit. The fact is, Canadians stuck in traffic on the Deerfoot or on the Gardiner or or elsewhere across the country know that we need a plan that's going to tackle transit and roads right now, not a decade from now like Mr. Mulcair, and not at all like Mr. Harper has been doing. That's what our plan is all about. That's why I'm going to invest in the future of our country.
Mr. Harper, is Mr. Trudeau onto something?
Absolutely not. You know, look, here are the facts. This year, our government is putting more into infrastructure, 15 times more than the last full year of the Liberal government. That is how much we've increased federal infrastructure investments. Over the decade to come, our economic action plan to create jobs and growth has some $80 billion, an unprecedented amount of money that's being put into federal, provincial, and municipal infrastructure across the country. Of course, the easiest thing to do for anybody else is come along and say, you know, let's just spend more. But we've managed to do this without raising your taxes and without borrowing anything as we move forward. Mr. Trudeau comes along and says, let's spend more, let's raise taxes, let's run a deficit. Running a deficit is not the kind of protection our economy needs right now. We're in an unstable global economy. We've managed to return to a balanced budget now for the second year when many other countries haven't done so. That's an asset we should continue to pursue, and we don't need to spend more just for the sake of being able to say we spend more.
Let's move to the open floor part of this question. Mr. Mulcair, you have the lead.
Thank you, Mr. Walmsley. Mr. Trudeau's plan is frankly reckless and it's uncosted. Municipalities across this country are asked to spend the cost, to assume the cost of 60% of the infrastructure with only 8% of the tax base. Mathematically, that's impossible. It's not sustainable. But what's also not sustainable is the old Liberal approach of leaving tens of billions of dollars in debt on the backs of future generations. We are going to be a reliable, long-term partner for municipalities across the country. We don't need the short-term thinking of the Liberals.
Actually,
we need money invested long-term. Our plan is for constant spending over 20 years, $1.5 billion a year in infrastructure, $1.3 billion a year in transit. Those are important sums of money, reliable, long-term.
Mr. Mulcair likes to talk about long-term, but what he doesn't realize is long-term actually starts right now. Not 5 years from now, not 20 years from now, not after a few mandates of Mr. Mulcair in government. Canadians need help right now. And the fact of the matter is that we have a situation right now where interest rates are low, so borrowing has never been cheaper for the federal government. Our debt to GDP ratio is low and getting lower. Our economy has been flat for 10 years. So my question is, now that there are thousands upon thousands of skilled Canadians looking for work in construction and in growth, if this isn't the time to invest, what would be? Because the fact of the matter is, I talked with Mr. Mayor Nenshi just yesterday, and he was saying that costs for municipal investments are actually down 20% this year because, compared to last year because of the circumstance we're in. This is the time to invest in the future of our country. Canadians know this. The only people who don't seem to know this are those two gentlemen on the stage.
Mr. Harper?
Look, not only are we pursuing a long-term, large-scale infrastructure plan under our economic action plan this year, we're proceeding with a $6 billion plan to eliminate the federal infrastructure deficit entirely going forward. That's what we're doing right now. And we're doing that without borrowing money, without raising taxes. Mr. Trudeau says he will raise taxes. Mr. Mulcair's plan is the same old NDP playbook. We saw it in British Columbia, we saw it in Ontario, we're seeing it in Alberta. A whole bunch more spending, and we can finance that just by raising taxes on a few big corporations and a few rich people. What happens? You start putting people out of work, slowing the economy, killing jobs. That's the reality of the NDP plan wherever it has been tried. And when we are in
Actually, Mr. Harper, you're wrong about that. You're wrong about that, Mr. Harper. Mr. Mulcair is not going to raise taxes on the wealthiest Canadians. He's chosen to not raise taxes on the wealthiest Canadians.
Mulcair, please.
Only the Liberal Party will to give a tax cut to the middle class.
Let's go to Mr. Mulcair.
Thank you, Mr. Walmsley. The NDP is categorical. We will not be raising taxes on individual Canadians. We are going to be asking Canadian large corporations to start paying their fair share. They're the only Canadians who don't right now. Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Harper are of one mind. They thought that dropping their taxes by tens of billions of dollars, way below that of our close trading partners, was a good idea. It hasn't been. But when we do raise it, it'll be reasonably, and it'll still be way below what it was under the Liberals, and it'll even be below the average of what it's been under the Conservatives. We're also going to make sure that we close some tax loopholes, like the stock option tax loophole brought in by the Liberals, which actually will ensure that people are effectively paying more, not a theoretical amount where they have all these loopholes that they can fall back on. With regard to the difference between the Liberals and us, it's true, the Liberals want to raise individuals' personal income taxes. The NDP won't do that. I don't think it's fair that someone looking at their pay stub is going to see that 58.75% is already gone in income tax. That will be the result of Mr. Trudeau's plan. It's not our plan.
Mr. Mulcair talks about corporations as being the only people in this country who are not paying their fair share. So he thinks the wealthiest 1% are paying their fair share. But if you look at the past 30 years, incomes for the wealthiest 1% of Canadians have increased by 70%, while their federal tax share has decreased by 32%. Now, I don't think that's fair. We're the only party that is asking that wealthiest 1% who has done well over the past years to pay a little more so we can cut those taxes for the middle class.
The question is on infrastructure. Is the creation of another bank the answer?
It's an infrastructure bank that loans to municipalities and provinces so they can take advantage of the preferential rates that the federal government gets. It's a way of, yet another way, on top of the $60 billion of investments we're making in our municipalities. It starts with doubling in the very first year for transit, for child care spaces, and for seniors' residences. It is time to invest in the future of our country. It has never been more appropriate to invest in the future of our country.
Mr.
These
Harper?
two gentlemen can't see that because they're stuck in a political way, not an economic way.
But Mr. Mulcair just claimed he's going to raise hundreds of millions of dollars through closing treatment of stock options. There is simply not that kind of money in that, and this is the approach of the NDP, to exaggerate how much money they can raise through a few tax hikes. The reality is, when he says he's not going to raise money on people, the payroll tax hikes of the NDP for CPP and EI amount to over $1,500 a person who's making just $60,000 a year. Those funds come right out of your paycheck. They come right out of the money you're using to pay your mortgage, buy your clothes, fund your kids' education. Those are real costs.
Mr. Mulcair,
they just don't go away
I want to
because
finish off the
you
last
say,
10 seconds.
fund something down the road.
The stock option tax loophole costs Canadian taxpayers $500 million a year, and it goes mostly to the wealthiest Canadians. We'll get rid of it.
We have to leave it there, and we now move to question 4. This is on immigration, and it goes to Mr. Harper. All parties agree that immigration is central to Canada's long-term economic strategy. What is the right balance between economic migrants and those seeking family reunification?
Well, look, every year we put out numbers, and I think we've maintained a balance between those various categories. We have, I think, about 2/3 of the people who come in are related to economic streams. Others are related to family reunification, refugees, other sorts of streams. But what I'm most proud of, David, is this is the first government in Canadian history that, faced with a recession, did not cut our immigration. And the reason we didn't cut our immigration is because we understand that, given the demographic and economic pressures in front of us, that a long-term, large-scale immigration program is in this country's interest. That's why we're looking at the long term. And I'm very pleased we've done that and moved forward on that. We're doing specific things to make sure, particularly the economic sections of our immigration policy, are more oriented to actually getting results. For example, we used to process applications in order. We now have what's called express entry, where we're targeting those applications that fill actual vacancies in the job market. And this is a transformation I think will be very important to making the policy even more effective.
Should we increase immigration numbers to counter the aging demographic of Canada?
Well, we've maintained our numbers at very high levels. They're over 250,000 a year. I think there is room going forward to increase that, but obviously we want to make sure we get the right mix, because there are significant settlement funding costs that come along with some streams of immigration. So look, I think that's a possibility going forward, but I think the main thing is that we make sure that we're maximizing the economic benefit of immigration. I talked about express entry. I'll give you another example of something we're doing, and that's the Foreign Credentials Loans Program that we brought in as a pilot. We're now expanding, where we have found that if we give, through third-party groups, immigrants very small loans to upgrade their qualifications so they're recognized in Canada, we can get them into the workforce much more quickly, and we have a payback rate on those loans of well over 90%. So I think there's lots of things we can do, even within our existing very large levels, to improve the system, but I do think we could look at expanding it going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Trudeau, what role does immigration play in your economic plan?
I think Canada has long known that immigration is essential to our growth. We have a country that has benefited from people coming here from faraway lands, building a better future for themselves and their children and their communities here than they could have anywhere else. And that's been the strength of this country, the fact that we are a country strong, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. And one of the things that Mr. Harper has continued to underinvest in and not create enough of is family reunification. You talked about it early on, David. This is something that is really important to create strong communities, because yes, the economic benefits of immigrants are well known, but there is more to them than just workers. They are community builders. They are creating stronger cities and stronger future for future generations. That's where the cuts he's made to integration programs and to helping Canadians actually succeed are so disappointing, because Canada has always given people a path to succeed here in this country. And that's what we need to get back to once again.
Open floor, Mr. Mulcair.
Canada is a country of immigrants. Unless you're First Nations, Inuit or Métis, Your family immigrated to Canada, and it's what built this great country, David. And I couldn't be prouder than to tell you that my wife, Catherine, immigrated to Canada. And she's one of the many people who's just contributed so much. And I think we can be so proud of that tradition. Now, under Mr. Harper's Conservatives, we've been closing the door more and more on certain aspects of immigration. Mr. Trudeau just referenced it, and he's right. Family reunification is essential. It's always been part of our immigration system. It's been completely shut down under Mr. Harper's Conservatives. I personally believe that the best social program is a united family, and you've got that strong family base there allowing people to come in. Shouldn't be considered, as the Conservatives always call it, just a burden for society. I think it's something that contributes a great deal. On temporary foreign workers, we know that they've left that program a shambles. It was created to help in areas like agriculture, but it's went off in all different directions. Even Mr. Harper, in a secret meeting with some media in Vancouver, admitted that it was a total shambles. And there's one final point. Mr. Harper referenced recognition of foreign diplomas and credentials. Well, unfortunately, it's still the #1 cause of unemployment amongst immigrants, failure to recognize diplomas and credentials. I used to be chair of the Quebec Professions Board. I've got a lot of experience on this. I know we can be doing a lot more to help
Mr.
that.
Harper?
Well, I'm not sure how you have a secret meeting with the media, but...
We wish.
But
You'd manage it, Mr. Harper. I know you'd manage it.
Let me just correct the facts. Under the first 10 years of this government, we've seen family and class and family reunifications rise by 25%. When it was under the previous Liberal government, it went down by nearly 50% in their first few years of office as they cut back immigration levels. So we haven't done that. And I think people understand that the New Canadians particularly, the Liberal Party talked a good game, but didn't deliver. We have 2.5 million newcomers in this country who are overwhelmingly contributing positively to this country. They're entrepreneurs, they're family people, they're growing our economy, working hard. And this is one of the most positive things about this country, that we are able, through controlled and legal immigration, to have the best record on integration and success in immigration anywhere in the world. It's something I think we all should be very proud of.
Mr. Harper has demonstrated over the past weeks that in the case of refugees, Canada is not doing enough. And this is something that Mr. Harper has unfortunately done a number of times. I mean, he likes to talk about standing up against tyrants and dictators and against terrorists, but you know who stand up against dictators and terrorists? Families fighting to keep their family together, hoping for a better life for them. And they cross the oceans and they make it to Canada. And what does Mr. Harper do? He takes away their health care. The fact is, we need to once again be a country that is open and welcoming. Yes, we need to be concerned about security, but we don't take that as the excuse to close our doors. In years past, whether it was Joe Clark, a Conservative Prime Minister, who brought in tens of thousands of Vietnamese boat people, whether it was other governments who welcomed in people, who built, who contributed to this country, we need to once again be the open, generous country, not naive, making sure we're doing security right, but not using it as an excuse to do less than we should, than the vast majority of Canadians, including mayors and premiers, feel we should.
Mr. Harper, let's try and bring it back to the economy.
Yeah, well, let me just correct the record on a couple of things.
Refugees are about the economy, David.
Trudeau said about refugees. First of all, the fact of the matter is, we have not taken away health care from immigrants and refugees. On the contrary, the only time we've removed it is where we have clearly bogus refugee claimants who have been refused and turned down. We do not offer them a better health care plan than the ordinary Canadian can receive.
That's
I think that's something that most new and existing and old stock Canadians agree with. On the issue of refugees, this remains one of the largest countries in the world in terms of refugee resettlement, including from Syria and Iraq.
That's not true, Mr. Harper.
I have said we will bring in more, but what I have said we will not do. You know, these guys would have had in the last 2 weeks us throwing open our borders and literally hundreds of thousands of people coming without any kind of security check or documentation.
And that's
some other
not
countries
true,
have
Mr.
done.
Harper.
That would have been an enormous mistake.
See,
we're following a balanced
Mr. Harper
approach where we bring in more refugees.
Fears
all
the
where
time.
We're providing
fears
more
of
humanitarian
others,
support.
fears of different communities.
And we're taking
we have a
on
Prime
the
Minister
terrorists
who
are
prefers
creating
to
the
pander to
Okay,
fears.
let's go to Mr. Mulcair.
That's not right, sir.
Immigration and the economy.
Canadians want a Prime Minister who understands the sense of urgency that we all feel when we see the current crisis in Syria. Mr. Harper, unfortunately, and it's undignified, is fear-mongering. It's completely false to affirm that any of the parties in Canada would want to throw open the doors to people without any regard to security. But Rick Hillier, who is no less an authority than former Chief of Defense Staff, last week said, we've got to stop using the security concerns as an excuse to do nothing. So, Mr. Harper, why don't you stop using the security excuse as a pretext to do nothing? Because nobody wants to let somebody in without a security check, but you're doing nothing.
Harper,
We're announcing that we're bringing in more refugees. We're announcing we're bringing them in more quickly. We're providing a matching fund for humanitarian support because even under the most generous refugee policy, the vast majority of these millions of people will remain in those countries and will need our assistance. Those are the things we're doing.
The UN has asked us to bring in 9,000 refugees before Christmas, and you won't do it. They've asked for 46,000 over the next 4 years. You won't do it. That's the United Nations asking that, Mr. Harper.
But it is not the kind of reckless approach that these two parties are advocating.
Fear-mongering on the backs of people who need help, the most suffering in the world.
Canada has done more in the past. We need to do more right now.
Okay,
we will do more on October 20th.
Move to the next topic, and the next topic is housing. Mr. Trudeau, Canadians have been on a borrowing binge to buy ever more expensive homes. What would you do to guard against a housing bubble?
Well, the fact is, for many Canadians, their entire economic security is in their home. It's their savings, it's their retirement. And we need to make sure that while housing prices rise, incomes are rising as well. The middle-class Canadians believe that their jobs are giving them better and better salaries, that they can get raises. In order to do that, we need to create economic growth. We need to reassure Canadians that the economy is going to grow at the same pace as their house values. And that's not what Mr. Harper has delivered. He has the worst record on growth since R.B. Bennett in the depths of the Great Depression. But there are many other Canadians who are facing challenges around housing because they can't find rental housing. And that's why the Liberal Party has a plan to increase investment in home construction of rental units to help seniors with the cost of their rents by increasing GIS and by making sure that we actually give people the support needed to be able to get their homes and have that economic security.
Would you restrict foreign ownership of residential homes in Canada?
I think one of the things that we're seeing in a number of places around the country is concerns on that, but the fact is we don't actually have enough accurate data to understand entirely what's happening. And one of the reasons for that is Mr. Harper has chosen to cut the long-form census, and it leaves us with less understanding of the very real needs. The Liberal Party is committed to restoring the long-form census to ensure that we have the kind of data so that we can respond to local challenges like you speak of. What we need to be as a federal government is a much better partner to provinces and municipalities to be able to address challenges that are being faced in our major centres like Vancouver or Toronto, but also the challenges that are being felt right across the country for people who are struggling to buy their first homes, people who are struggling to find rental housing, and who need help to get that economic ladder to success that has always been there for Canadians but hasn't been over the past 10 years. That's what the Liberal plan to invest in the future of our country is all about.
Mr. Mulcair, what would you do to help the squeezed middle class who have high mortgages and high property taxes?
Well, thank you, David. And the first thing I think that Canadians should recall is that the last time the Liberals were in power, they cancelled Canada's national housing strategy. It's also worth knowing that there were 35,000 homeless in Canada right now. So what we would do, gave an example earlier of our quality, affordable childcare at maximum $15 a day. You know, here in Calgary and Toronto and lots of other cities, parents are paying well over $20,000 a year for childcare for an infant. It's simply unaffordable. And young people today have the largest student debt that there ever was. As I went across the country, I met lots of young people who are thinking of having a family, but they look at the cost of that conciliation, balancing their life and their family and their work. It's extremely difficult. So we would make sure we would put more money in their pockets with quality, affordable childcare. And we would bring in, as a model for others, and with regard to the 100,000 people that it would give a raise to, a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour.
Open floor, Mr. Harper.
Well, first of all, let me just say, well, no doubt there are some people who are overextended. I think the housing story is a very positive story in this country. You know, you look around the world where there have been all of these financial and other crashes, a lot of them centered around the housing market. In Canada, we have seen home ownership rise to record levels. We now have higher home ownership than the United States because people have been able to take advantage of lower interest rates when their job prospects have been solid and good and their incomes have been growing. That's a positive Canadian story. that we should celebrate. How do we, in this unstable global economy, continue to protect that going forward? We believe we bring in specific incentives to help homeowners. For instance, the home renovation tax credit we're bringing forward, the improvements to the home buyers plan, the doubling of contributions to tax-free savings accounts, things that allow people to save and invest more in their homes. What we do not need when our economy is threatened by developments in the global economy is tax increases on ordinary Canadian families through payroll taxes or permanent deficits. These are risks we cannot afford, and they're not good for our homeowners.
Mr. Harper talks about growth, but he hasn't been able to get it done for 10 years. He has the worst growth record in 80 years of any prime minister. So we know how to grow the economy. We invest in the economy once again. Interest rates are low, our debt to GDP is low, and economic growth has been flat. We need to kickstart our economy, and that's exactly what we're going to do so people can get better jobs and actually afford their homes. That's where we help. And Mr. Mulcair, who's talking about childcare, the fact is that a young family with a 2-year-old doesn't need childcare 8 years from now when their kid is in grade 5. They need it right away. But Mr. Mulcair is not making a choice that's going to allow to invest in his promises. They're puffs of smoke. We need to invest right now. We know right now to invest in the future of this country.
Okay,
Mr. Mulcair, you can make jokes all you like. This is Canadians having trouble making ends meet, and you're offering a national minimum wage that will not touch 99% of Canadians.
Mr. Trudeau, thank you.
You're giving false hope.
Here's what we're offering, Mr. Trudeau. You had 13 years the last time you were in power to get to childcare. It was in 4 successive Liberal red books. And you know how many spaces they created? 0.
That's not
the
true,
least
Mr.
we can
Mulcair.
say is that it wasn't a priority for them. Quality, affordable childcare is a
8
top
years from now,
priority for the
Mr.
NDP.
Mulcair. 8 years from now, if the provinces kick in billions of dollars,
Mr.
if the provinces
after
kick
that,
in.
it'll go up.
Can I ask you, what message do you give to millennials today who are trying to get onto the property rung? What do you say to those with student?
Well, I say that we've got a prime minister who just said that he thinks it's a good idea that a bungalow in a lot of our suburbs in places like Vancouver and Toronto is totally out of reach for them. Look at the cost of housing in some of our major cities. It is out of control. And at the same time, Mr. Harper says, it's okay, I've got a renovation tax credit. How do you renovate a house you can't afford to buy in the first place? We're going to start by putting more money in people's pockets. Affordable, quality childcare is one of them. We'll give a raise to over 100,000 people earning the federal minimum wage or less. They'll get more money. A $15 an hour federal minimum wage is not only good for them, it's a good signal to the provinces to do the same thing, to bring up a living wage. You know why? Because I think that somebody who works full-time shouldn't be living in poverty. I'll leave
Mr. Mulcair, I have spoken to an awful lot of Canadians earning the minimum wage. They work in coffee shops, they work in grocery checkout lines, and you're giving them false hope by talking about a $15 national minimum wage.
Mr. Trudeau, because
you
when
are
we
promising them a national
we
minimum
had people
wage.
who were working in banks, in airports, in interprovincial transport, and in ports. They're earning less than $15 an hour, and over 100,000 of them are going to get a raise.
99% of
be a signal to the provinces to bring in a $15 an hour federal
earning the minimum wage aren't going to be affected just by Mr. Harper's puff.
One second,
Mr. Harper.
We'll come back. Mr. Trudeau voted for this on September 22nd. Now he's campaigning against it.
I think Canadians have a right to know that. The false promises you are making. You pretend this national minimum wage is a significant thing. It's not going to help.
Anyone out there didn't realize
it's not going to help 99% of people earning the minimum wage.
This is the election that's showing it. Let's go to Mr. Harper.
Yeah, just to repeat, we're not just bringing in a home renovation tax credit, we're also enhancing the home buyers plan to help families reach their and be able to build their first home, just as we've enhanced the first-time home buyers plan. So we've done a lot of things to encourage home ownership. In terms of rising costs due to a possibility of foreign speculation, we've said we're prepared to act on that if the data show that that is really a problem.
After
Look,
10
we're
years.
doing more than these things to help Canadian families. Mr. Mulcair talks about childcare. We've delivered directly to Canadian families the universal childcare benefit. Now we are enhancing it. We're increasing deductions through income tax for your childcare expenses.
Yeah, but that's not what you
We're
promised.
doubling the tax-free
Mr. Mulcair,
Mr. Harper, you promised 125,000 childcare spaces, and you delivered the same amount as the Liberals, precisely
without
zero.
raising your taxes,
Now,
without bringing
why did you promise childcare
spaces
if you had
Mr. Harper,
Mr. Trudeau,
without running
Mr. Harper and Mr. Mulcair agree on one thing. They want to continue to send Mr. Harper's UCCB checks to millionaires just because they have children. We don't think that's fair. We're going to stop sending those checks to the people who don't need it so we can send larger checks to the families who do need it and lift 315,000 kids out of poverty. That will make a significant difference in the lives of people who need it, and neither Mr. Harper
Trudeau,
nor Mr.
even
Mulcair
after you
will
take
actually
away
do that.
We have to move on.
You don't have enough money in your
Wrestling
budget
alligators.
to fund your promises.
We move to
That's
the
why you have
final topic
deficits.
of the first half of this debate, taxation. Mr. Mulcair, we address this to you first. You say you will raise corporate tax rate from the current 15% to 17%. What economic rather than political reason justifies your decision?
Well, Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Harper have had a single-minded approach. The Liberals and the Conservatives have agreed that tens of billions of dollars of tax reductions to Canada's largest and most profitable corporations was the way to go. But as we've seen, David, that hasn't worked out so well. We've lost 400,000 well-paid manufacturing jobs on Mr. Harper's watch. There are 300,000 more people unemployed today than when his first recession hit. So yes, the NDP is quite clear that Canada's large corporations are going to go back to paying something resembling their fair share. It'll still be less than the average that it was under Mr. Harper's Conservatives, and it'll be well below what it was under the Liberals. But we're asking all Canadians to pay their fair share, and that would include the largest corporations. But at the same time, we're going to start right away. We're not going to wait like Mr. Harper would. We're going to start right away to reduce the taxes on Canada's job creators. Our small and medium-sized businesses create 80% of new jobs in this country, and that, we think, is a good idea. We're also going to close stock loopholes, because those are the types of loopholes that exist for the rich. We'll make sure that they effectively pay more. That's the right approach.
But if corporations move their money elsewhere, you lose both your balanced budget and your revenue.
That's why you've also got to work at the same time against tax havens. Mr. Harper's done nothing about that. We've had cases where other authorities in other countries have given full lists of Canadians who have been using illegal tax havens, and Mr. Harper's done nothing about that. At the same time, the NDP will take an approach to make sure that the wealthiest start paying their fair share. When we made that announcement at the Broadbent Institute, we looked at the successive years of promises by the Liberals talking about millennial goals to help raise children out of poverty. I don't accept as inevitable that in a country as wealthy as Canada, hundreds of thousands of children go to school every morning without having eaten. So we're going to take that money, the $500 million that the stock option tax loophole gives to Canada's wealthiest, we're going to dedicate it dollar for dollar to help lift those children and their families out of poverty. That's direct action to act on a problem that the other parties have talked about for years but have done nothing about. Yes, Canada's largest corporations are going to start paying something resembling their fair share, David, and it's high time that they did. Their approach has failed, and it doesn't work, and we will change it.
Mr. Harper, you won't raise taxes. How do you raise the federal revenues?
Well, actually, as you know, we've cut business taxes, and our corporate tax revenues are actually rising because we have a competitive tax environment that attracts investment. You know, I go back once again to what Mr. Mulcair is saying. He's claiming he's going to cut taxes on small business. Then why is the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and other experts saying that his plan will cause job losses? Because in fact, he raises taxes. And we've seen this NDP playbook everywhere. They claim they're going to balance the budget, bring in billions in new spending, balance the budget through tax increases. And what happens? We end up with job losses. That's what we had with the NDP in power in Ontario. That's what we had with the NDP in power in British Columbia. And we're seeing exactly the same story here in Alberta. We had a round of layoffs because of low oil prices. Now we're having a round of layoffs because of the business tax increases of the NDP. In an unstable global economy, we have competitive tax rates. They're not super low, but they are competitive. This is something we need to protect our economy, keep creating jobs. High taxes, permanent deficits do not create jobs.
Open floor round. Mr. Trudeau, take the lead.
Well, Mr. Harper is just talking about the round of layoffs here in Alberta, and that's exactly why we have a plan to invest in creating transit, in creating the kinds of support to invest now when there's an opportunity and thousands of people are out of work with skills that can be put to work in building our country right now and in the years to come. But on taxes, we've been very clear. We feel that overall Canadians pay enough in taxes, except the middle class should should pay less taxes and the wealthiest Canadians should pay more. So I will do what my two opponents will not. I'm going to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we can cut them for the middle class. Now, Mr. Mulcair likes to talk about fair share, but what he's going to do will do nothing to tax the bank executives who get paid high salaries because cutting corporate taxes will just prevent the banks or the executives to hire more people in their economy. We're actually going to lose jobs with Mr. Mulcair's approach on taxes.
Let's go to Mr. Mulcair.
Mr. Trudeau's very first vote in Parliament 7 years ago was to back Mr. Harper's corporate tax giveaways. And one of his most recent and one of his last votes in Parliament was to vote for Bill C-51, which seriously compromises the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. We stood up against C-51 even when it was highly popular. We showed why it was dangerous. That's leadership.
That's
Mulcair,
what we're going to continue to do. We're talking about Canadians getting ahead right now, and you're playing the same kinds of politics of division and fear that Mr. Harper has. Mr. Harper wants to talk about terrorists hiding behind every leaf and rock.
Talking about
Mr. Mulcair wants to pretend that suddenly we've ripped up the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or in a police state. Both of those are politics of fear that the Liberal Party has refused to accept because we need to both protect Canadian security and defend our rights and freedoms, and the Liberal Party has always done both. But on taxes, we have a plan to actually lift 315,000 kids out of poverty by increasing child benefit payments to families who need it. And we're going to ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so we can lower taxes for the middle class. This is something that neither Mr. Mulcair nor Mr. Harper will actually do. And it's not about politics for us. It's about doing the right thing, recognizing that for the 10 years of Mr. Harper, there hasn't been the kind of growth that Canadians need, and Canadians with money in their pockets to spend are actually going to create opportunities for themselves, for their families, for their communities.
Doing the right thing, Mr. Harper?
Absolutely not. Let me just be clear on what we've actually done. Now, we have reduced, in the case of small business, the federal tax burden on small business is down by over 40% under this government. It's going to go down further. We brought in things like tax-free savings accounts that 11 million Canadians are benefiting from. Income splitting for our pensioners and our families. Over 6 million adults benefit from that. We're bringing in a home renovation tax credit that millions of people will want to use, will be able to use. We're enhancing registered education savings plans, registered disability savings. We brought in the cuts to the GST, the broadest tax cut you could possibly bring in, 2 points that benefited virtually every single Canadian. This is why the New York Times, no conservative paper, ran an article that said it compared the Canadian middle class to other middle classes where our disposable income has actually been moving ahead when everyone else has been falling behind. Partly because we're making sure we have more money in people's pockets. And we are the only party not talking about raising any of your taxes going forward or running deficits going forward. And this is, in an unstable global world, the kind of plan that we need, not one that comes up, gives you a small business tax cut, and then comes in and hammers your employer and hammers you as a worker with an enormous payroll tax increase.
Actually, Mr. Harper is talking about disposable income. We just saw that disposable income for families has hit almost 165%. Canadians are more indebted now than they've ever been. That's why we need a government to actually step up and create opportunities for Canadians by investing in better transit, by investing in social housing and childcare spaces, by investing in the support for floodplains mitigation like we need here in Calgary, investing in green infrastructure that's going to create the kinds of jobs going forward that we know we need. We have a plan to invest in the future of this country, and we're being absolutely straight about it. Yes, we are going to run modest deficits for the next 3 years because borrowing has never been cheaper because of low interest rates, because our debt to GDP ratio is healthy and going lower, and because the economy is flat and Canadians need jobs. We have a plan to kickstart the economy, to make it easier for the middle class to get ahead, to make it easier for people who want to join the middle class to succeed. That's what we are actually putting forward, and right now neither Mr. Harper nor Mr. Mulcair has a plan to do that.
Mr.
Harper thinks it's all fine.
Mr.
Mulcair says he puts it off.
Thank you very much, David. Mr. Trudeau recently said that a large percentage of small business owners were tax cheats. Frankly, I find that offensive. That doesn't correspond to the small business owners that I met across this country who, it should be reminded to all of us, create more than 80% of the new jobs in our country. They deserve a tax break. That will help create new jobs. That's the way of the future. That's the NDP's
But you're
plan.
collecting
Mr. Trudeau,
$500 million
from
off
experience
of them.
about the shell company you set up for your speaking fees. That's not the experience I've seen with the mom and pop operations
Your
across
experience is to
Canada.
play
Thank you very
politics
much.
with everything, Mr. Mulcair.
Thank you to the three leaders. Now, while the leaders catch their breath, we'll move to the second part of the evening. And this part has a different pace to it. It is said that in the old days, the electorate used to choose their representatives. But now, as data becomes more sophisticated, politicians are able to choose as well as ignore key demographics. It affects everything from policy to selection to who the politicians choose to talk to. It marks a profound, and some would say uncomfortable shift. Wish me luck as I try to push the leaders off their well-rehearsed speaking notes and give each of them the opportunity to explain themselves more thoroughly and hopefully with fewer interruptions from the others. I will ask each leader a specific question that will be followed by an exchange between myself and that leader before turning it to open debate. Again, the leaders have no prior knowledge of these questions. And we'll start with Mr. Mulcair. Mr. Mulcair, you lead a party that has never run the country. Why should the electorate hand the national economy to you?
Well, thank you, David. And that is a key question in this campaign, because after 150 years of being told that we have no choice, that when we're tired of the Liberal sponsorship scandal, we have to alternate back to the Conservatives, and when we get tired of the Conservative Senate scandal, then hold on. For the first time in our history, there is another choice. The party that, according to Canada's own finance department, has the best record for balanced budgets. Tommy Douglas took over the province of Saskatchewan that was in bankruptcy after Liberal rule, ran 17 consecutive balanced budgets, and brought in Medicare. I come from a family of 10 kids. I'm the second oldest. We had to work hard. We lived within our means. We took care of each other. Those are the values that have guided me as a father, as a grandfather, and as a husband. I'm very proud of that, and those are the values that will guide me in the future. We are a party that will make people our top priority. We brought in Medicare with Tommy Douglas. We'll bring in affordable quality childcare across Canada.
Your biography is entitled Strength of Conviction. But is your determination to avoid a federal deficit at all costs not simply opportunism and a defensive play?
It's something that reflects exactly how I've been as a public administrator. I've been in public life for over 35 years. I practiced law as a lawyer for 10 years during that period, but I've always served the public. My wife, Catherine, is a psychologist who works in long-term care and palliative care. Our older son is a police officer for 17 years in the Quebec Provincial Police. Our youngest son is a college professor. We all serve the public. I think that there's no more noble calling. So I want to make sure that we do the right thing for people going forward. I want to make sure that when my granddaughter goes to university, she doesn't have to borrow at the level that young people are borrowing today. I want to make this a better society, and I don't want to do like Mr. Trudeau, leave a massive debt on the backs of future generations.
But this determination for a balanced budget, no deficit, is surely something that is a challenge to the NDP's fabric.
Our fabric understands, as I just mentioned with the example of Tommy Douglas, but you can look at the Roy Romanos of this world. It's in our DNA. We know that the only way to bring in something as important as quality, affordable childcare across Canada is to build it on a solid foundation, and for us that means balanced budgets. Doesn't mean that there won't be times when you have to spend. In 2008, we were in the worst recession since the 1930s. Of course, everyone agreed that we have to spend at that time, but that's not the case now. We don't want to leave more billions on the backs of future generations. We're already leaving them a massive ecological and social debt. They don't need that economic debt as well.
Okay, I want to follow up, and this is a recurring issue as we enter the last part of the debate. And that is what all of your visions are for this great country. What, Mr. Mulcair, will you do to build a new economy?
Well, one of the things that we will do is make sure that it's a knowledge-based economy, because we know that that's the way of the future. The only way to create new wealth is to create new knowledge. And Canada has to be playing a more active role. But when you look, when I traveled across the country on what we were calling a kitchen table tour, I was in Sault Ste. Marie, the young couple that I met, I was in their home. They told me that between them they had $130,000 in student debt. With a $24,000 a year childcare fee and houses where they are, when's that young couple supposed to start thinking of starting a family? That's the reality today, and believe it or not, Having children is a good thing for that couple, but it's also a good thing for the economy. So let's get this right for the future. Let's make sure that we get our priorities right. My priority is always going to be doing like we did when we brought in Medicare. That helped my family, but it's helped Canadian families for generations now, and that's why we want to make sure that our social programs are on a solid footing, and that includes balanced budgets.
Okay, let's go to the open floor part of this, and Mr. Trudeau.
No,
Sorry. Yes, Mr.
Mr. Mulcair keeps talking about investing in our future. He keeps talking about doing the right things for families who need help, except you can't put forward a plan for investment like my plan on Stephen Harper's budget. It takes the optimism that we need to invest once again in our future, to know that Canadians are capable of building a stronger future. And after the low growth that we've had for many years, it's time to kickstart the economy. That's why what I'm worried about saddling my kids with is a lack of jobs, a lack of good infrastructure, a lack of a future because a government didn't want to invest in our country. Now, this is what our plan is all about, building a stronger future. Mr. Mulcair is putting it off. He's made balancing Stephen Harper's budget his priority, which means he can't give Canadians the help they need the way we will. That's what our plan is about, and I'm being straight and honest. Mr. Mulcair's plan is to actually do what we know politicians of all parties, including my own, have done in the past, which is to say we're going to balance the books, and then oops, the numbers are worse than we thought. We're going to have to break our promises. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm being honest with Canadians. We're going to run 3 deficits, and we're going to invest in the future Canadians need right now.
Mr. Harper?
Look, the whole essence of Mr. Mulcair's plan is that he says he will balance the budget through tax hikes. That's what the NDP's tried everywhere. They left Ontario in a massive deficit. They left British Columbia in a massive deficit. Manitoba is in a massive deficit. Alberta's deficit has got larger since they took office. The former Saskatchewan Auditor General says they left Saskatchewan in a deficit because tax hikes do not grow the economy, they do not create jobs, they kill jobs and they hurt revenues. And we don't want to go down that path. Now, Mr. Trudeau says we will have greater optimism by spending more. I actually think this is what Canadians fear. We don't measure our level of optimism through our level of spending. We make sure we're making investments in the things we need to, as we are doing, in infrastructure, in training, in innovation, but we do that in a way that we know we can continue to do and continue to afford without raising taxes by having a balanced budget. And I think in this unstable global economy, that is an important guarantee for people's future and why they should be optimistic.
Now, Mr. Harper, what you don't understand is what Canadians can't afford is to continue to be stuck in traffic every morning because there's no reliable transit, because the federal government hasn't stepped up as a partner. I mean, you've been stuck in a motorcade for the past 10 years, but most Canadians are actually very aware that the transit underinvestment is a drag in our economy. And I've talked with municipalities and provinces right across this country who need a reliable federal partner to step up and invest. And people, serious economists across this country have said that we have a plan that is exactly what we need. No less than the person you appointed to head up the Privy Council, Kevin Lynch, actually said, yes, a plan for investment right now is what we need. The former chair of the Bank of Canada, a list of the former parliamentary budget officers. There are many people who've said now is the time to invest, and that's exactly what the Liberals are going to do. Not because we're cheery and optimistic, but because we know that countries that believe in their future are willing to invest in their future.
Mr. Trudeau,
and that's what we're going to do.
We have the largest infrastructure investments in history right now, including major public transit announcements going on all over the country, including right in this city.
Yeah, at election time, Mr. Harper, at election time.
And those are the facts that I ask everybody to look at the numbers, to look at the numbers. They're there, and we're doing that without raising your taxes and without borrowing money. Mr. Trudeau says he has former public servants and politicians who tell him it's okay to spend more. I got to tell you something. Those people will tell you always to spend more. That's what they will tell you. You've got to be able, as a Prime Minister, to know when to safeguard the taxpayers' money.
Please, Mr. Mulcair.
Thank you, David. Our plan is based on long-term vision. We know what has to be accomplished. We are not doing like the Liberals with their short-term approach, leaving tens of billions of dollars on the backs of future generations. And you know, Mr. Trudeau, you were talking before about Stephen Harper's budgets. but you have voted for Stephen Harper's budgets. I can guarantee you I have never voted for one of his budgets, and your very first vote as a member of Parliament was to vote for his tax giveaway to Canada's largest corporations. I can guarantee you that Jack Layton and I fought that every single step of the way.
Okay,
voted
thank you.
against every
It's,
tax break for middle class and working Canadians.
I think what we're seeing tonight is an extraordinary exchange of ideas between a now centrist NDP and a deficit-favouring Liberal Party. So I want to turn this one to Mr. Trudeau. Taxing the richest and then spending it. Why should Canadians who are already up to their eyes in debt be encouraged by your message?
Actually, we are raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so that we can lower them, so we can cut them for the middle class. That is the shift that we feel we need. Mr. Mulcair talks about income inequality. You can hear the NDP talking about income inequality all the time, except they actually are not doing anything about it. Only the Liberal Party is going to ask people who've been very successful to do a little bit more so we can put money in the pockets of people who actually need it. That's what our approach is, because we know that that's what we have to do. But on top of that, and aside from that, we are also going to make historic investments in the future of our country, because Canadians need transit, they need roads and bridges, we need clean water and wastewater treatment systems. We need things that are going to create good jobs for Canadians now as they build them, and good jobs and prosperity going forward as our communities do better. That's what investing in our future is all about, and that's not left or right. That's what Canada needs.
Mr. Trudeau, we know that you propose what is really a fairly modest deficit against a $2 trillion national economy. What do you consider to be the biggest single challenge you face? Because when I look for the cost of your platform, I can't add it up.
We were the first party to put out a fully costed framework that said that we indeed are going to run 3 modest deficits over the first 3 years so we can balance the books in 2019. Because what Canada needs right now is growth. What we need, because Mr. Harper has been unable to deliver it, having the worst growth record of any Prime Minister since the depths of the Great Depression, is a plan to grow the economy. And you do that by investing in our communities, in transit, in green infrastructure, in the kinds of things that are going to contribute to growing the economy.
Let's go back to your idea of an infrastructure bank. Recreational centres, water facilities, are these areas that are part of the federal government's role?
The federal government's role in a country like Canada is to be a partner serving citizens with communities, with municipalities, and with provinces. We will respond to the needs that Canadians have on the ground to improve their quality of life, to build better opportunities in their cities. That is what the federal government should be. That's not what the federal government has been over the past decade, as Mr. Harper has refused to engage with the provinces, has not been a solid partner to municipalities in the transit and infrastructure investments that are needed, and that's exactly what we're going to turn around.
So
it's not up to the federal government.
We're in Alberta this evening.
Yes.
There's clear sense that structural change is happening to the economy. So again, for yourself, what will you do? What are your policies to build that new economy?
Well, one of the facts we're looking at right now is because of the challenges with low oil prices, we have construction and engineering multinational firms here in Calgary who are suddenly bidding on local contracts that they've never had the bandwidth to do before. This is the time to invest in your hometown, Mr. Harper. You need to step up, and we need to step up as a government and be there for municipalities like Calgary who are trying to create new avenues of opportunity given the cyclical nature of our commodities. This is exactly a moment to invest when interest rates are low, when our debt to GDP is low, and when the economy has been flat for 10 years because Mr. Harper hasn't stepped up for his hometown or for anywhere across the country.
Let's go to open floor, Mr. Harper.
Well, look, if I could respond to that. As I said before, we are making record investments in our infrastructure right now, including a federal infrastructure program that is rolling out across the country. But, let's be frank about Mr. Trudeau's plan. The reason Mr. Trudeau is running deficits is not because he has some underlying economic philosophy. It's because he went around the country and promised far more money than he actually had and found out that taxing a few wealthy people a little bit does not cover that. And so now he's trying to run saying deficits are a good thing. We did a lot of work to make sure we came out of deficits after the Great Recession without cutting our social programs. That's what we've done. This is a guarantee to people, to you ladies and gentlemen out there, that when we've lowered your taxes, they're going to stay down and the investments we make are sustainable. And when Mr. Trudeau gets us off the anchor of a balanced budget for no apparent reason, we know where that's, the Liberals have done that federally and in Ontario, that goes on forever and it gets worse. And that is not a risk you or our economy in this fragile economic environment can afford.
Mr. Harper, you have run deficits in good years. You have run deficits in bad years. The only time you've said that deficits are not going to be run is in election years. The fact of the matter is you stood on stages like these, looked at Canadians 3 times and promised not to bring in deficits. And yet that's exactly what you've done. The reason that we're stuck in deficits for so long is because you don't understand that giving tax breaks and benefits to the wealthiest Canadians is not a way to grow the economy anymore. We have low growth. You have the worst job creation record since World War II of any Prime Minister, and that's what Canadians are feeling. You are disconnected from people's reality. We need, once again, to get this country investing in its own future, and that's what you haven't done for 10 years.
Let me correct the facts. We ran surpluses before we had the global financial crisis. When the global financial crisis came, everyone in the world ran deficits, and we told Canadians we would run a massive stimulus program, get it out the door quickly, sustain our economy through that period, and that it would be temporary and the deficit would fall until it was eliminated. And we've done exactly that on exactly the schedule we said we would do it, and we're now in our 2nd year of a balanced budget.
Okay, Mr. Mulcair.
Why would we return to deficits now when we have an unstable global economy and we need to make sure we can assure people that the benefits are delivering?
Mr. Mulcair,
That's
Mr. Mulcair,
why.
please, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Mulcair.
Back on July 19th, Mr. Trudeau gave a press conference at which he said he would balance the books. He would run balanced budgets nonstop.
Actually,
Just
not
a
nonstop.
few weeks after that, he announced that he would run $10 billion a year in deficits. Now, you just heard him say the same thing. He was clearly criticizing the fact that Mr. Harper had run deficits, but that's exactly what he's planning to do. So I think, Justin, that it's only fair to say that when your advisors tell you one thing and another and they're totally contradictory, pick one. You just can't say them both. With regard to tax cuts to the wealthiest, your first vote in Canadian Parliament was to vote for Mr. Harper's tax cuts for the wealthiest.
Mr. Mulcair,
now you're against what you did.
Mr. Mulcair, I am looking straight at Canadians and being honest the way I always have. We said we are committed to balanced budgets, and we are. We will balance that budget in 2019 because Canadians need investment and growth
Mr. Walmsley,
right now.
there's another point that has to be brought up, which is that Mr. Harper claims that he made no cuts to social programs. I'm sorry, Mr. Harper, when you sat down with the provincial ministers and announced that you were going to be cutting the funding formula by up to $36 billion for health care, that's called cutting social programs.
Let's be absolutely clear on what the facts are. Under this government, our transfers for health to the provinces have risen from $20 billion
It's what you're planning to do, Mr. Harper. Stop denying the reality.
Increase. And that number will grow every single year into the future. It will hit over $40 billion
Mr. Harper,
by the
you
end of the
raised
decade.
the age for old age
is
security from 65 to 67. You didn't make that announcement to a group of hard rock miners in Sudbury. You made that announcement to a group of billionaires in the Swiss Alps.
Until the year
is that political courage?
2023. What we've done in the main
You're cutting social programs, period.
The biggest increase to the guaranteed income supplement for our most valuable seniors in a quarter century. And Mr. Mulcair, you like to talk about the fact you voted against business tax cuts, you voted against small business
tax cuts.
Mr. Harper,
you just made a statement that is patently false. You said you never cut social programs. You're cutting Medicare. You're raising the retirement age. You know that that's not true.
For both retirement and health care, and the public accounts
Mr. Mulcair has talked about health care transfers, but he just stepped back from that promise. He promised to increase health care transfers, and now he said, oh no, balancing the books is more important.
We are.
That's not what Canadians
we are increasing them.
Thank you. We now move to the final question of the debate, and it goes to Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper, you're going to need some new ideas. The reality is the oil patch resources in general are going to be a smaller part of the Canadian economy. And it is clear that under your watch, Canada is no longer an international champion on many different data points. We have record household debt. We have minimal growth. And in many cases, we have stagnant wages. Why do you deserve more time?
Well, let me be clear on that. Those things are just, David, I just don't accept what you just said. You look over the past 10 years, whether it's income growth, whether it's job growth, we have done better than all the major developed economies. It hasn't been great because we are living in a terribly unstable and risky global economy. Right now, a portion of our economy is being hard hit by the fall in oil prices. That's something that concerns me. I come from here. It affects people I know personally. I've been personal friends and family for a long period of time. We'll do something about that. But to suggest for a second that that has been all there is to our policy is just false. Our policy is based on what I call the 3 T's, the 3 I's. Taxes, getting them down, keeping them down, making them competitive. Training, making sure we're investing particularly in things that we know there's labor demand for in the future. Trade. Opening up markets. We now have, through the trade agreements this government has signed, we're going to have in the future access to over half of global GDP. Investing in innovation with our manufacturers and reforming our immigration system to make it even more effective for our economy and making record investments in infrastructure. That's why I believe Canadians are optimistic if they look at the future.
Well, let's drill down on trade, for example. Yeah. What do you say to the auto sector as you look at the Pacific Trade Plan?
Well, look, we know the auto sector has concerns on that particular, as do others. But David, what I say is this. You know, we're entering the final stages of a trade discussion in the Asia Pacific that I think, frankly, is going to conclude successfully, that is going to be the basis of the global trade network in the Asia Pacific for the generation to come. And what I say to the auto sector in particular, I'm not suggesting they will necessarily like everything that is in that, but what I am saying is we simply cannot afford as a country to have our auto sector shut out of global supply chains. That would be a disaster. We're going to make sure we get the best deal for that and all of our sectors, but we are committed as a government to making sure we do not fall behind in our access to a global trading economy which is so integrated. If we do that, that would be disastrous for this country.
Now, you know better than most the challenges and the problems that come that can't be predicted.
Right.
You're facing an economy that is incredibly challenged, that demands new thinking.
Right.
What are you thinking of for the new economy?
Well,
how do we turn this from resources to knowledge and the sharing economy?
Look, David, I have come to work now for 7 years in a row with nothing but economic crises around the world. You know, it's a banking crisis, then it's a sovereign debt crisis, a housing crisis. We now have market chaos in China. We have the fall in commodity prices. We do have to do 2 things. We do have to respond to these crises, but we have to operate on a long-term plan. And that is what we have been doing. And you know, that long-term plan is not just about resources, but it is also including resources. I don't want to suggest for a second that we are not going to have a vibrant resource sector. The fact that we have an unparalleled resource endowment, we have one of the highly educated workforces in the world, and we have innovative and progressive manufacturers, that we cover the complete spectrum of the economy is one of the reasons Canada is able to weather these global economic storms better than both, and we are committed to making sure that all of these sectors move forward together.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Harper. We're going to now go to Mr. Mulcair and the open floor, please. One of the questions that the Prime Minister responded to was with respect to his vision. What do you think that the NDP can do to transition our economy beyond the buffeting winds we have with oil prices, China and the US Fed today saying we're not going to raise rates again?
Well, I believe it is possible, David, to build a Canada that is more generous and more prosperous. Mr. Harper tends to believe that everybody's in it on their own. I think that we're all in this together, and I think that we should try to work hard to raise everybody up. You know, I do come from a very large family, and sometimes we're tough, but I've seen what it is when people work together and they hold together. They try to give each other that helping hand. I also know that it's high time that around the world people started looking at us differently. I want our democratic institutions respected here at home and our international reputation respected abroad. I want to make sure that every young person gets the opportunities that they need, and frankly that our seniors get the help that they deserve. That's why we've proposed to raise the guaranteed income supplement, to raise several hundred thousand of our poorest seniors out of poverty.
Mr. Trudeau, what do you say to Mr. Harper's position that the Liberals will allow for a deficit but then there will be slippage and that deficit gets out of control.
On the contrary, the reason Mr. Harper hasn't been able to get out of deficit is that he hasn't created growth. His cuts to and underspending to veterans programs, to First Nations, who we haven't talked about enough tonight because they're an important element in building our economy and making sure that we're creating proper partnerships and moving our resources, as well as creating educational opportunities for young people across this country by investing, for example, on the Liberal platform, $2.6 billion in First Nations education. We have an awful lot we need to do to keep investing in growing this economy. Mr. Harper continues to think that giving tax cuts and benefits to the wealthiest Canadians will somehow create growth. Well, it hasn't, and that's why we need a change. Mr. Mulcair talks about all the right things, but he's not going to be able to actually act on them because, unfortunately, he has backloaded his promises and he's committed to balance when we don't need balance. With low interest rates right now, with a declining debt to GDP ratio, and with a flat economy, we need to invest in our future. That's what confident economies do, and that's what the Liberal Party of Canada is proposing. It's the right plan to help Canadians
Mr. Harper?
now.
Well, look, when it came out the other day that it was confirmed by the Auditor General that we actually had a surplus last year, not just this year, but a surplus last year, Mr. Trudeau immediately came out and said, well, that's because they've cut veterans and they've cut seniors and they've cut infrastructure.
And of course, people looked
at what's actually in the annual financial statements. And spending in all of those areas has actually gone up. And the way we balanced the budget was we actually did increase revenues. We did it by cutting taxes. And I guess what I say to people is the same thing I said before. We're not saying in this fragile global economy everything is great. We have significant risks and significant challenges. What we're saying we're doing is we're making sure we're investing in the things that will cause long-term growth, and we're investing in things that help people in their pocketbooks to get education, to save, to retire. And higher taxes and permanent deficits is a risk that buys nothing for our people. And that we've got to reject that kind of a plan.
Mr. Mulcair.
Mr. Harper was elected on a promise to make Ottawa better, to change Ottawa, but unfortunately it's Ottawa that changed Mr. Harper. Corruption has actually increased, and that's part of his legacy, but also Ottawa has become a more divisive and a meaner place. Our relationships with the provinces are more divisive and meaner. Under Mr. Harper, he's refused to attend any meetings of the Council of the Federation. I come out of provincial politics. I know that it's part of my job, if I become Prime Minister, to sit down regularly with the provincial premiers, to work with them on important issues facing them and on things that we want to bring forward, like quality, affordable childcare. It's a different approach.
Now, one of the things that I think is fairly clear is that I disagree with these two gentlemen on a number of things. But the main thing that I disagree with them on is their lack of ambition for our country. Mr. Harper wants you to think that better just isn't possible. Well, that's not true. In this country, better is always possible. Mr. Mulcair talks about making things better, but isn't going to act on it because he has no plan to build the economy we need.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. This much anticipated Globe and Mail debate on the economy comes to an end. You've heard a wide range of different views, and in a month's time, it will be voting day. I would like to thank everyone who has joined us and made this evening possible. To Mayor Nenshi for hosting us here in Calgary. We at the Globe and Mail believe in the national debate, and I am sure that you agree that we got one tonight. Final word of thanks, of course, to the three leaders, Mr. Harper, Mr. Mulcair, Mr. Trudeau. We wish you all well. We know that you have a common interest in doing the best for Canada. You just have a different way of doing it. Stay with us. We'll be carrying the post-debate scrums later. But first, Jane Tabor of the Globe and Mail joins us now to begin the post-debate debate. I'm David Walmsley, the Editor-in-Chief of the Globe and Mail. Thank you, and have a good evening.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.